Okay, so yeah, so just to say, Facebook went down 22%. I mentioned this just before something. Yeah, Facebook. Can we just do it with? I'm not. So it's users, right? I mean, I tried to delete it like a long time ago, do the burn it down thing, and then many years later, there was this thing that so I popped back on because we were going to get data from Facebook or whatever. So someone had to have it's really clumsy. Someone had to have a username. So it's all still there, of course, right? It was all still there. It was all still there. It's like, hi. It's so bad. Does the stock maybe can I? Yeah, there you go. Ooh, that's fun. 5 days. And this is because, right, the first time ever, the average users per day dropped, and they spent a ton of money. I know, but we're just here to see it. It's nice to be here to see it. Look, it may go over like this, and Metaverse takes over, and what I don't know. But well, that's the thing about this, right? This is 22% of belief in this company just went gone. Like your belief just went away. I mean, there was a big signal of information, but it's an astonishing amount of money just to go. Boop. Economics, totally reasonable field. Very sensible. Definitely makes sense. The meme stock characters, that was pretty awesome, which I vaguely still understand, but I it's great. There's still that sort of story, like on average, you've got maniacs and idiots and whatever, and people who don't know what they're doing in stocks or whatever, and all these things. But on average, right, it works out. So sort of the market is rational because they've sort of had to give up on everyone being because that was the underlying thing. But then you met people and reflected on yourself for a little while, and you're like.
The first conversation I had at Story Lab was I got in kind of a fight with Colin Van Ort that no one is rational. That was like my first conversation.
That's good. Well, I'm glad you. Well, I know which side you're on, I suppose. Yeah, well, we had a collection of people who were kind of from that world. Yeah, graduated, but it was interesting they were attracted to our group because obviously we're a bit of a different framework, right? And I mean, I think one thing missing with a lot of that study is, just this. There are people do it, but the social. It's not just like raw social influence. Where you say, oh, yeah, lots of people do this, but like the actual mechanics of stuff swimming through people's, right, the contagion, and it's really hard to kind of think about, but it's really sort of even all of behavioral economics and all of that stuff, it still sort of leaves aside the collective behaviors, Anyway, Spotify, I think, also took a little, because I know that's somewhat relevant to. I should do 5 days. So this is okay. So these are bad graphs, right? This is just a fundamentally bad graph because this is 140, this is 200. I'm not sure what. I understand it looks better, but like it's sort of centered, but there's a 0 down there. So this is just I mean, all right. But yeah, that's the Joe Rogan effect, right? Or the Neil Simon was the first one which was about podcasts. So this one, just to look at this again, because I didn't realize, this is 240. So, I mean, it does say the percentage, right? So this is how much it's dropped in that. So in 5 days, of course, it had gone up quite a bit already. Apparently, every day it was getting better. All right. So that's sort of big news. My wife's a financial journalist / sci-fi writer, but she, it was the first thing she said. Did you see what happened to Facebook? She's writing about it. Like yesterday, Zucker resigned from CNN, right? So it's a big thing, and it seems to be all connected to, it's a mess. But I went to look for the CBS tweet about it, and I sent it to my wife, and she said, yes, I wrote that story, which was kind of, like, it was her story. Because I didn't look at the byline. I thought it was probably, it's kind of nice. All right. It's pretty, that's pretty good. I wrote it. I thought you would have done it, but that's, I'm going to tell you about Dawdle. Has anyone seen Dawdle? This is Dawdle. Let's do the daily Dawdle. So, So you enter one word at a time, but it's going into both slots and it's doing the two things. So you have to like get both of them by the end. And once you've got one, you're in shape. Like, I don't know. Let's guess canoe. Okay, it's not canoe. Uh, uh, nope. So C and A. Oh, so they both end in C and A. All right. So what do we think, people? Oh, but I's not in the first one, so maybe it's like fence. The repeated letters are tricky. The other one could be mince or something like that. So that's, but it's not an N, right? So it could be something. There's an I in there, so it could be ICE. What else are we missing from that one? It's not. It's not a sense is a. Uh, so the spice. It's not that. Can we do it? The P is out. I'm not looking at this properly. Slice is, I think slice has, and there's also like the feel of like how exotic the word is. Like I tried SATYR the other day, like SATYR, and that was clearly like just a little further down the zip distribution. And but so all right, slice is feeling pretty good. It's not going to be a Y. We know it's an I, and it's not. Since was a good one, but it doesn't seem like that. Yeah, there you go. Nice. Anyway, this is so bad. Okay, see if you can bring them up. All right, good. Okay. All right, people. Let's okay, I'm gonna did I talk about making archives better? This is pretty nice. So archive is my favorite place. I hate peer review. It's a complete disaster. It's not working like people want it to, whatever they say. Nature had an article the other day, which was why early career researchers should review more, right? Maybe I talked about it. It's just unbelievable. And people rightly ratioed that to pieces. But this is a paper, this is the allotaxonometry, but this is really nice. You just change the V to a 5, and it does a pretty good job these days of rendering it into HTML. So that's good. I mean, LaTeX has always been, way sort of too complicated, but we got MathJax at some point, which made this look good. Early on, any kind of math online was just like a little, well, it was a GIF actually. It was a GIF, but .gif, but just as an image, because we sort of know of them as GIFs now, and they're little videos, but they're fun. They were originally fundamentally an image. So there'd be just this crappy little thing, and like if you scaled it up and down, it would stay the same size. It was terrible. And it was, pixelated and awful. But MathJax is really beautiful. Anyway, this is a nice thing for science, which is generally speaking not on its own side. So that was good. It's a slight side thing. So trope for the day. I'm going to keep doing the tropes because it's fun. This is the doomed expedition. You just know it's going to, so Apocalypse Now, which is Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness story, which, problematic, I guess. But so this one, I'm not sure if that's from, but it looks Shackleton style, right? Shackleton famously didn't lose anyone, right? This is in Antarctica, whatever, 100 and something years ago. A cat went missing. It's unclear. The captain apparently, the chef never, or the cook never forgave the captain for what happened to the cat apparently. But anyway, maybe lost. Mr. Tibbins or something like that. But they managed to, they were stuck in ice and they managed to get out and walk thousands of miles or whatever. But they had things like libraries and cutlery and porcelain because it's the English, right? They're absolute madmen, right? They tend to perish in the middle of halfway, near the top of Everest and all these sorts of things. I mean, how they conquered the world is it really remains a great question. But this sort of thing, so there are real stories, and then there's, of course, we love this sort of thing. And the one I wanted to mention mostly, I suppose, is everything associated with Werner Herzog. So this Herzog, Herzog, who could narrate existence, I think it would be good. He This is kind of interesting. Achievements. This is tropes for just his existence. This is just about him, right? Apparently, he lived in a remote village and didn't know movies were a thing until he was 11, and then started to watch them and got upset because his friends didn't seem to care about the weird things that happened because he thought it was all true. So that maybe sort of got him stuck. He's been in Rick and Morty, Parks and Rec, ridiculous things. But his doomed expedition, right? He has a whole bunch of these things. There's the one going into South America where everyone is in a lot of trouble and dies, and so on. But I thought connected to that, I would like. So, are we Werner Herzog fans in any way? Do we know him? Ah, so a rampagingly crazy German character. And we'll hear from him for a little bit. Let's do that. This is South America. This is.
It's an unfinished country. It's still prehistorical. The only thing that is lacking is the dinosaurs here. It's like a curse weighing on an entire landscape. And whoever goes too deep into this has his share of that curse. So we are cursed with what we are doing here. It's a land that God, if he exists, has created in anger. It's the only land where creation is unfinished yet. Taking a close look at what's around us, there is some sort of a harmony. It is the harmony of overwhelming and collective murder. And we, in comparison to the articulate vileness and baseness and obscenity of all this jungle, we, in comparison to that enormous articulation, we only sound and look like badly pronounced and half-finished sentences out of a stupid suburban novel, a cheap novel. And we have to become humble in front of this overwhelming misery and overwhelming fornication, overwhelming growth, and overwhelming lack of order. Even the stars up here in the sky look like a mess. There is no harmony in the universe. We have to get acquainted to this idea that there is no real harmony as we have conceived it. But when I say this all full of admiration for the jungle. It is not that I hate it. I love it. I love it very much. But I love it against my better judgment.
Anyway, overwhelming and collective murder. It's if you're not really familiar with his oeuvre, you should. I recommend you. This keeps pointing my ear. I recommend you just look up some Herzog action and see what he has to say. A very peculiar fellow. Okay, all right. Okay, there are some other scenes from that, but that's maybe the 80s, I think. Yeah. He appears everywhere. He's in The Mandalorian. You know, he's sort of this character, and he never changes his accent. He just turns up and reads stuff out. He does like that. Anyway. Okay, so I know we did the telephone. I appreciate you. Well, we just did it. I want to talk about this at some point. This is an amazing document that an uncle of mine, who's a rare books dealer and an archive kind of ephemera person, does very interesting things. he came across this in a box somewhere, and I scanned it and and I think I got the, yeah, I did the optical character recognition. It's pretty great. This guy, I looked him up. He was a Duke sociologist, and this is in the Second World War, and he's talking about essentially, is there a trajectory for like a global government emerging, and looks at like a lot of these things, like this sort of growth of territory and so on historically. Like, is there sort of a trend to, inevitable trend towards this sort of thing? And he talks about, I think he mentions, maybe quoting Churchill, like a united sort of states kind of framework for Asia and Europe, which of course the EU did come into existence. England popped off. And I know I showed that visualization in Parks where you can see the breaking up of colonial structures, but this is a funny thing. I looked this guy up. He also did a lot of stuff on paranormal. He has papers about ghosts and the afterlife, and he's just a straight up, sociology professor at Duke. It's pretty awesome. He was in a seminary before that for maybe 5 or 6 years, so we were traveling around trying to find the meaning of everything. So, okay, we'll get to that. That's a good one. All right. I don't know if it's sitting here, but I do have this paper that I think we should come back to as well, which is 2021. I'll just find it here. It's meaningful measures. Where is that? Yeah, maybe I mentioned it there, but I just want to say we should come back, because this, look, there is just an enormous struggle within the social sciences still about, doing this kind of like measurement, right? They're very averse to it in some parts. Some parts are going too far into it. It's a mess. But obviously there's stuff, right? And Lazar is very sensible. Very, he's a famous character. He's at Northeastern, one of the leaders of the network science group, which we have a nice connection with. Institute, I should say, not group. But this is well done. Mentions Duncan, my old colleague, and blah 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 blah, telescopes and things. It's part of a bigger piece on computational social science was last year. So much as I run around waving my flag, and our stuff is well cited, it helps to have things like this that we can point to. Anyway, we'll come back to this. Google flu. I don't know if you knew about that, for example. This is something that he talks about here. Google flu trends, which was a big deal when it came out. It's just basically how much do people search for, like, coughs and flu and fever and stuff, and then trying to turn that into, like, this is the level of flu in a region. It's a clever idea, right? So I remember being in an NSF thing in the late 90s, and Vespignani was there, and he's the head modeler of, he's become this fantastic modeler of pandemics, and he's done the best work, I think, in the last, during this time. He's at Northeastern as well. He's David Lazar's colleague. But I remember someone there giving this kind of wild talk about how everyone should have a sensor, and we should know everyone's temperature, and then you could just figure out, like, what's, like, if a disease is kind of building somewhere and spreading before the hospitals get over. I mean, in principle, but it sort of came off as like, like, I'm going to inject people with things. It was a little hot. But of course it's happened, right? I mean, people run around with these things and measure their sleep and all that sort of stuff. So big sleep and big smartwatch are sort of collecting all it. So in principle, you can sort of do it. There's all these ethical considerations. But going forward, the sort of first thing in that way was Google searches for stuff related to flu, and it worked for a while. There was a couple of years where Google flu trends like had a little trend, and it matched with as a real-time estimate of what was later because it takes a while for those cases to be counted and all those things. It was working, and then I don't know, people searched in different ways, and more sort of bots came along, and it didn't work. Like, it failed one year, and this is a very Google-like thing to do. They're just like, wow. They made a thing, like one pass at it, stood it up, it worked, stopped working, gave up. The history of Google is like there's lots of creativity, and they just can so much stuff, and so that's anyway. David Lazar was a critic, and early on, unfortunately, he sort of criticized. He said, "Look, here are some problems with it," and then it was just like, boop, gone. Right. Bloop, bloop, bloop. Anyway, this is Werner Herzog and Rivers of Insanity, right? Doomed expeditions. We watched them, I guess. We watched them. Yeah. Apocalypse Now. And the making of that was a doomed expedition as well, right? So that was all. Yeah. Okay. So I wanted to just get back to this happiness stuff, and I'm gonna work through it. And do I have? How does this thing work these days? Amazing. And just try to get through it properly. So, because I sort of jumped ahead, I wanted you to try to understand the. I wanted you to understand the word shift thing, which is it's not like general relativity or something, or some crazy obscure math, but it's got some little subtleties in it. It takes a little bit of work and experience with it to kind of, but it's look, this is like how thinking works all the time, right? Like basically something is unclear, it's a mess, it's a maze, it's tricky, whatever, and you can't do it, then you can do it, and then it's obvious. What you have to avoid doing is being that person that says, oh, this is really easy to other people or something, because it's not how, like if you find something easy already, you already have the template from something else. So it's not as if you're actually seeing it straight away. You already have a thing that you can bring across to it. So it's a word that I remember thinking maybe when I was like 18 or 19, like this is a terrible word. People should not use this word the way they use the word obvious. And I would talk about it a lot. And Duncan Watts wrote a book, which was sort of my title, I suppose. But it's everything is obvious except except when it isn't. So that's what I'm trying to say there with these word shift things is they're a little weird, and I think a lot of people just can't. They just seem like we're doing something truly magical or strange, and we're not. We're not really. I mean, there's a little subtlety to it, but anyway. All right. So I know I started with this a while back, but I didn't get very far in the intro. So I still want to give the motivation. There's the sort of economics, like measuring, measuring the emotional state of populations. Obviously, this can be used by bad actors in terrible ways. I think that's part of, unfortunately, the game. It's an arms race, right? We need to figure out how to do all these things, just as the bad guys do, and we're trying to do stuff. I suppose it's much more at this kind of large scale level. Like there's a critique, right, of gross domestic product, which is much more measurable, even though it's a bit weird. But the thing is, you turn a money sign out at the end, and people are like, okay, we just looked at the Facebook thing, and we're totally fine with that, even though it's total madness. Like it's one number that represents Facebook. So here's a profound. I mean, I know I talked about it in Pox, but I don't know how we can get away with it, but we are mapping incredibly complex things into a one-dimensional measure, money. We do it with people, have salaries, and we say some things aren't, whatever, like some ridiculous metal rabbit gets sold for $100 million, which is probably money laundering. But, what? I don't know. Can we get out of that trap? I don't know. But one way to get out of it is to have like multiple ways of measuring things. And that was really a big motivation for us. Let me see if I can find you. This is a ridiculous example. Rolling resistance. So I like to do these triathlon. Yes, I think I subscribe to this. This is great. So this is what they do, right? They measure tires. They put them on things, different pressures, right? Measure the rolling resistance, different kinds of tubes, whether they're tubeless, blah, blah, blah. Vittoria is pretty great. Where's the Vittoria one? Yes, very nice. So, and you'll have seen this in many places, but things where we really care about things and we worry about whether something's going to explode or not, tires on bicycles, these are good. These are good things, right? There's a bunch of measures to think about, right? And there's, whether it's got, which one is this? Oh, it's not the race one. So this is more of a, right? This is something you want, like on a day-to-day, right? Sort of okay in these things, that's going to matter to people. And this is different. So there are two different measures. We did this for hurricanes, right? So we had these radar plots for hurricanes, which was, how many lives lost, how much money, how much it was talked about on Twitter, right? So these are efforts to do it. I think these are things people can kind of understand, these little pictures. They get criticized because I think one of the problems is that people say, okay, I've got 10 tires in this case, and I'll put them all on top of each other. I mean, this could be just a bar chart, it's true, but having little shapes can, and if it stays the same list, you can get a quick feel for it straight away. Yeah, so I actually do subscribe to this because I want to know about it. Wow.
I feel like it would be harder to do on like a bar chart or bar plot because like the axes would be like different.
You have to normalize them, right? So that's a thing. I've seen it for like sleeping bags. You know, I remember seeing like a little tag on a sleeping bag, and it had like a little radar plot. I'm like, see, you know, like, of course there's a it's is it speed? Yeah, it's this one. This is a good one. Yeah, there we go. I'm glad you saw that. Thank you. Right, right. Right. So this is, you can these are how you organize these things. You know, people will complain about like the area is misleading, which is fair. You know, I mean, you could just sort of have little spikes coming. It doesn't matter. I mean, this gives you a suggestion of what it is. I'll have some examples of this later on for emotions, actually. So, but you can see this is a comparison to all of these other at different PSIs. These are great, right? It's rolling resistance is lowest. That's what that means. But there's peril in this, and this doesn't really matter as much as like that. Anyway, that's what I try to use. Super weird. I mean, it's just a super weird, messy business, and it's really good to have something like this. Okay, so we're just trying to put another thing on this dashboard. I mean, that's a motivation. I know I've talked about this stuff. Yeah. Yeah. So I kind of got to here, and we talked about this. And I did Bentham. This is where we sort of ran out of time. You know, eudaimonia eudaimonia is flourishing. It's kind of this nice idea, and of course, these are the recordings of famous people who were being fed grapes or whatever, and you know, so very good for them, right? These are at the top of the pyramid, right? So what do we? Yeah. So we do care about this. I mean, you know, there's potential for everyone to kind of get better. I mean, how are people doing in tough situations? Is that township here going down or up, or you know, like, right? And it's not just about how much money they have. It's like all these different indices. You know, do they? And I will sort of point out, do these people feel safe? You know, and that's essentially what we'll see is a projection of happiness onto a dimension that's 45 pi on 4 around. Bentham, I sort of mentioned Bentham to you, and so for happiness, he had this idea of, well, you should choose your actions so as to maximize the happiness of the most number of people, right? Like, try to think of it like that. Which, you know, that's another trope, right? That's the greater good thing. The bad guy always says, I did it for the greater good. That's why I, you know, got rid of half of all living beings, or et cetera, et cetera. You know, it's a motivation. You know, we invaded this country for the greater good. It's such a line, you know, I did it for the greater good. Jeremy Bentham, let's find Bentham. So, you know, that seems pretty benign. He's a philosopher, but he did come up with, I think I mentioned it briefly, the panopticon, which was a prison in which, if you're a prisoner, you would never be certain that no one was looking at you. You could have a relatively few guards, and the way it was structured is that mentally you'd be like, someone could be watching me the whole time, which, thanks to little cameras and things, we've achieved in a different way. Although we forget about it, which is also good. So here's a bit of a funny detail for him. Bentham, it's always hard to come back to this and sort of, let's see, do they have it? Oh, it's interesting. Yeah. That is, yeah. So he died in 1832 and made careful preparations for that. and he's preserved. I don't know what to say about this. I just don't know what to. But this is University College London Student Centre. I mean, that's there. I mean, Jeremy. It's he had a public dissection. What a character. Anyway, so this is the problem with like basically try to track with ideas and morals and but not attach them to the people, too much. Like, I mean, as you get older, I think in any age you just get enough examples of people who, right, Lance Armstrong, um, in sports, whatever, like cheating or betrayal or whatever. Bill Cosby, I mean, these are right. So the list goes on. So you just don't want to, you want to sort of divorce those two things. Anyway, so Bentham, all right. So hedonistic calculus is what it's called. And there was a guy, Edgeworth, in the 1800s who wrote a paper saying, what about a hedonometer? And with an I in it, we spelled it with an O. But it's something we pointed to. It's like this kind of crazy paper. It didn't do anything. It was like, what if we could measure happiness, as well as this money thing that Adam Smith talked about, or whatever, or something? Like that would be useful. It would be pretty useful, and it just sort of has sat around as like, that's a good idea. And so we tried to do it. Economists who I'm happy to knock or whatever, very tribal, and you can't really go near economics. They just, well, I mean, all the fields are tribal. They're tribal in their own special ways, I suppose. Anyway, but this is a book from a while ago, but it's like trying to bring that into economics. I think there is sort of I'll call it a kind of a happiness grift. I mean, there are a lot of researchers who write the books, and it's like how to be happy and da da da, and it's like what do they have? Things like top flight research shows you how to it's all that sort of stuff. Right? So fine. Okay. But it's a real thing. So we're of course they're sort of serious about it, but they're making bank. So good. This is from that Layard book, but these are things that people have tried to do through survey and so on for a long time, figure out what makes people happy, and a lot of it is in social ties, but this is a straight up thing, right? This is a safety security thing. So if you look at this through a safety and power lens, which I'll kind of come back to, you can see how that's sort of all part of this, right? That these both hit on safety and power. And when these kinds of these relationships and work and these things go bad for you, right? Maybe you're in a minority. If you think of history's terrible things, I mean, in the present, of course, workplaces can be rough, family, these are, when those things are, that's rough. That's really hard. It's really hard for people. To sort of the extreme of the worst things that can happen. And being completely destitute. So the sort of the bad versions of these are clearly perilous, right? So you need these to be going okay. These, I don't know. These are, again, from a book, which is a summary of work that someone's looked at. But these things perhaps don't have as strong an influence as you might think. Health's a bit tricky. I don't know. Of course, there's what we think. This is based on surveys and so on. So you may have your own things. So these are, I mean, these also sort of matter, I should say. And these apparently don't matter as much. Although we've seen age does seem to have a complicated story, and I know I've pointed to it earlier, but whether it rolls over or is a U shape, there's some arguing about that. Looks, and this is sort of stuff kind of connects back to the eugenics characters, right? Like running around, like is it Galton and I think Pearson? These things that we shouldn't these things shouldn't be named after them. The Pearson correlation coefficient, blah blah blah. I think Galton wandered around cities looking for good-looking people and counting how many there were, and then tabulating things and so on. And right, fun. I mean, yeah. So that's one piece. There's this. Being happy is what people, if you ask them, of course, you're asking them, which is complicated. Do you give them a menu of options? Is it free form? There are suggestions that happier people live longer, but if you think of this as being safe and powerful, fair enough. Right? That sort of makes more sense. You know, you see it being talked about a lot, right? So there's just sort of a framing of this. This is sometimes called the Easterlin paradox, ridiculously named after a person who pointed it out. But it's this claim. So this is what is it? It's gross national product per capita, right? This is a while ago, it's 1995. So per capita, so that's sort of normalizing it. That makes it fairer. And this is some measure of happiness. And this will have come from a survey which says, are you very happy, kind of okay, not happy? It's like, and then you turn that into 0, 1, and 2 to get numbers. So a little bit tricky. Right? How do you quantify that? But what you see is there's a huge range for places that aren't doing well in just terms of how that culture seems to, people in that culture seem to rate themselves. And this is about, you have to look at what the question is, like, it's like, how happy are you right now? And how happy is your life in general, right? So that you talk about those, you can kind of talk about those two pieces. They're quite different, right? Day to day might be a little rough, but overall, if you ask someone like, yeah, it's good, right? But so a huge range here, and then it's this idea of a plateau. And so this has been argued with and reanalyzed more recently, and then maybe a bit of a tick up. Denmark's supposed to be the happiest, here it is up here, but if you ask Danes, they don't really. They're very tall. That's true. That's actually true. Yeah. Like everyone is. Yeah. So anyway, but this, that's something. This is immediately breaks the money thing, a bit, right? Obviously, you want to measure some different pieces. Bhutan is sort of famous in the UN and so on for saying, hey, we're not going to make any money, but we're going to focus on happiness, and we'll have an index for it. The UK had one. Australia, places have created them. Gallup polls in the US do this, right? You call up people and say, how happy are you? Which is a weird interaction, right? So that's part of it. You want those surveys done, but that's a weird thing. You're asking people, and we know that that's going to mess with things a little bit. So I should say that, just to emphasize, trying to do a big data kind of thing, you're not trying to replace pieces, which I think is a lot of the AI deep learning. Like you're going to do some big scale thing that will replace any small scale human interaction kind of stuff. Like the hope is, or the hope, I don't know. Like, for a lot of Silicon Valley people, it's like, how do I replace the role of my mother, essentially? Like, I want burritos to come to me. I want to be driven around, and I want a little app that can do it. And then you've got the metaverse. I don't know what the metaverse is for. So, so we'll try to do a big data thing. That's what we've tried to do for a long time now, but it is complementary. So that's important to sort of see. It's not replacing. So this is just some stuff, right? So as soon as you do this, you get into some people like happiness is not what it's for. This is Eric Hoffer, who I've quoted before, because that's kind of what he did. He just made quotes and some, like all sorts of aphorisms that can go in different ways. This is where the flow, Csikszentmihalyi's kind of idea of flow comes in, which is not really about happiness. It's actually just being in the moment and doing something. And his sort of chief example, I suppose, is something like rock climbing, where it's, you're not exhilarated or whatever, maybe, but you're in this deep flow concentration state, and it's good. It's enjoyable. It's maybe you're not even aware of yourself, right? But it's, you get it from sports, you get it from music, you get it from lots of things, writing, creating. And that's a very different focus. And I've wanted to sort of try to measure that kind of feeling. That's an interesting one. That's a really interesting one. This is old Colbert. He's in an interview, and this was happiness is totally overrated. He had this great line. It was that, and then happiness is for the weak. So it was really quite magical. I think I have another one here. This is.
Before she died, Colleen told me she just wants me to be happy. Really? That doesn't sound like it. Just want me to be happy. You know how you say that too?
someone who can't hope for anything more in life than just being happy. You say that to someone who is disappointed you.
Sorry.
She's a genius. One last twist of the knife.
This show, which I personally enjoyed, but this character, right? He's the sort of conservative, da, da, da. Repeatedly, if you watch this, he talks about meaning and happiness a lot, right? That's a big, big deal for him, and so they come back to it in various ways and kind of have some good stuff like this. But what's you say that to someone who's disappointed you? I just want you to be happy. And look, people really frame their minds like that. It's not about happiness; it's about money. Like make money, have power, and whatever. Like that's which is a safety kind of thing, really, as well. Like dominate other people. I will say in the world I grew up in, which is not relevant. I mean, I'm not trying to in any way generalize, but being weak was the thing you would really. I mean, there's swearing everywhere, but if you called someone weak, that's really what it was. You're weak. Which it's interesting to see that kind of everywhere really in society, especially with men. I'm one of three brothers, so it's sort of it was a pretty easy framing to be implanted on people. We would joke about it a lot. Yeah. Everything became weak. That's weak. That was a good joke. Yeah, that's true. We would sort of parody the environment around us. Really funny. All right, that's the line. It's great. This last line is so great. One more chance to disappoint her. She looks up at me from her throne in hell. All right, so the flow thing, I did have it in here. I was worried I didn't. But this is Shiksai Mahai. Are you familiar with this? Yeah. I mean, it did really well for itself in the 90s, which was a time when people had hope and things were kind of. I mean, I sort of feel like things were kind of, the 90s is a weird time. Yeah. Not for everyone, of course, not great for everyone. Absolutely not. But it seemed a little a bit of a stretch there where there weren't massive things happening in the world, perhaps. Yeah.
Certain activities that are it's not like subjective to the person. Like one thing that's flow for me might not be for you.
Right.
What does flow mean?
Yeah. So let's see the definition, but it's what I poorly described before. Was trying to describe before, but it's this feeling of being completely lost in something. Like it's an activity that goes. It's long, or it has a fair amount of duration. It's something that requires concentration, like deep concentration. It's there's a level of difficulty, but not. I mean, rock climbing, definitely some danger, obviously. But the flow state you get in rock climbing, for example, just because it's a fairly pure example. I mean, it's not something I do. It's an example from this guy's life. Is that it's you have control over it though, right? You have control of. I mean, good rock climbing, you're not going to die, right? That's sort of the idea, and you have control. It's puzzle solving. It's hard. It takes a lot of work in the past. You don't want to start thinking about TikTok videos in the middle of it, right? And your brain won't. That's the thing. Your brain doesn't let you do that, or that doesn't happen because the engagement is so strong, just like being in a lecture. Sorry, I'm kidding. But the engagement is so. I got a fourth wall. The whole thing is fourth wall. 16 walls. Is that's Deadpool. Deadpool. Right. Yeah. Nice. Anyway, but the flow thing is right. Let's find it. Let's find it. And it does. It's not really emotional. So there you go. It's 1975, but he kind of writes the book, and it becomes the big deal. I mean, I was really taken by this. mainly, I mean, maybe, hyper focus, right? But it's not so much that at the end of it you're toast as well, right? Like you want to come back to it. It can be hard to get into. Something like sports type things or music, you kind of start it and you're underneath, you're in it. Like it may take you a while to organize yourself to get there, but once you're starting to climb up this thing, it should be there. And if it's not working, you should get off, right? Like, or you can't, you've poked yourself in the eye with the with the violin. It's probably time to we'll try it again. But it's a pretty good state to existence. So measurement, right? So there's this. How do they measure it? The flow question, the old FQ. It's a tough one because you don't want to ask people in it, right? Like how like someone's halfway up a wall and you're like, could you answer these questions? Please open your iPhone. I've got a little. So this one came along. This is a bit different, and we'll see. Kahneman, Tversky, the famous, right? So would kind of use this experience sampling, but this was a big deal for Shikshan Bahai, which is like you get a little beep, and back then it was the first ones might have been like you get a phone call or you have a thing that beep because it was before phones, right? Before mobile phones. So now it's obviously you would have it on a phone. But it was you randomly sampled throughout the day. Like, what are you doing and how is it going? And I have another chart on that in a little bit. How would you sort of like, are you feeling good? Like that, you could ask a bunch of questions, obviously, but that's a pretty reasonable idea. Yeah.
I feel like if you're trying to measure flow for say like a certain task, right? So let's say it's rock climbing, let's say like distribution of like how good a rock climber is, like looks normal. I'll bet that like if you're not like one of the best like rock climbers out there, your flow looks like
it's a good question, but I mean, if you can have what you kind of want, ideally, is that people are pegged to their level of ability, and I'm not saying this is true for rock climbing, although I think it mightn't be far off. Like you do something that taxes you in the right level, and you don't go too high and you don't go too low. It's not too easy, it's not too hard. So we have all the ratings for things so that people can kind of match themselves to a task.
Weird that there'd be like a relative flow because flow seems like it's just like you're.
It's for you, given your skill set, given the task complexity. And we know people just get it wrong. You could have flow being a complete, like playing the worst music you've ever heard, but you're having a great time because you're sort of like, you're actually doing, you're achieving something, and maybe your ear doesn't work well.
I wonder if like you can have like a gradient when you're going into flow, like most of the way there, or is it just like when you're fully thoughts don't wander?
Is it a binary kind of state? I think it's a little bit binary, like you're in it, and as soon as you start thinking about being in it, it's game over, right? So to give a little boring example, but the cryptic crossword thing, like when I found like there's absolute flow state with that where you weirdly just get the answers without even looking at the questions. Like your brain is just doing all this in the background and it's happening, and you maybe do 5 or 6 like that and you think, oh, I'm going really well. Gone. That's it. As soon as you become aware, I mean, my experience of becoming aware of being in this state, yeah, so it's a, and there's a lot of, people have thought about thinking for a long time, right? And not saying that they've, but this is Vipassana, right? The mindfulness idea, which is, I mean, it's pretty weird, right? I mean, existence is weird. Existence is super weird. It's super weird. We're on this ball. There's another one that's really hot, some way off, about 90 million miles, and we, gravity. We have things, words. We're pretty good at not thinking about it, right? That's a bit of a weird flow state to be into, right? Just basic existence. If you think too much about existing, it's not great. I'm going to say that very sadly, actually. Yeah.
I guess it's like a different thing if you're just doing something mechanical that you can do so subconsciously you don't have to think about it.
That's different, yeah, where the skill gets backgrounded. That might not be, like say, you're peeling potatoes, right? Like, and you do it all the time. So you're good at it and you're thinking about something else, actually, right? So that's not really a flow state. And a little bit dangerous, right? Because you end up peeling yourself or Is there a word? Here's a question. Is there a word for? So you're hulling strawberries, right? Because we have to have a special word for that. So you're taking the things off, and you're putting the strawberries here, and then the things here for the compost or whatever you do. And halfway through it, you start doing you're putting them in the wrong pile. You ever do this? You know what I mean? Like you some stuff's going in the garbage. This is the good stuff. You do it for 5 minutes, and then you do another 5 minutes where you're doing exactly the opposite. Like you're still putting one place in. You know, it's like but your brain, because you're lost. You're off with the fairies, as my mother would say.
It's the same as when you swap the gloves.
Is there a word for it? I don't know, but I propose the word stuttle because it means it's like an old 1700s hangover word from older versions of English that means like muddy the water. So and
Not
it
bad.
sounds like it.
Yeah, because you are messing things up.
Studdle.
Oh, stuttle.
Yeah. It's like not gonna be the first definition.
No.
It's a
Let's try it. I'd like to give Wiktionary a chance. Oh, no.
If you try, maybe you have to nudge it to get to the old timey meaning of muddling water, because I don't know that anyone uses it.
Do they have it?
Probably alteration of
Do
Uh,
stuttle and water and then see if it comes up, because I want to be vindicated.
well, I sort of am asking it for fun because it's a bit of a hard thing to look up, right? Like,
Too muddy as water. There we go. And yeah.
I guess it's. I just wasn't looking at. Oh, okay. Did I just?
That would work for like
Did I just miss
because
that?
you're kind of muddling up the task you're doing,
Yeah,
and it's a fun word that we should bring back.
yeah. I'm pro. I'm pro all words. Right. Yeah. That's great. I like it.
Stuttle feels the same to me as like when you mix up the first, like swap the first letters of two words, like saying bait squirter instead of
Anyway,
skateboarder.
well, so it's a spoonerism, right?
Yeah.
Poor old Spooner. Why is this here? By the way, some years ago we had the Merriam-Webster social media guy give a talk, right?
He was so
It was
great.
awesome.
It was really fun.
Yeah.
What was it called about?
Words. He just talked about words. He talked about, well, and it got into some of the stuff we do, right, with story stuff, because it's basically which words do people search for around events. So you can kind of, in retrospect, if you look at the words people are searching for, you get a different again to like Google searches. This is dictionary searches. You get this kind of imprint of what's happening in the world that people are all talking about. And it's different than what's happening on Twitter. It's different. Google searches are different again. So putting all those things together would be super interesting. I forgot about that. That was cool. I thought that was. I mean, because the Twitter feed for Merriam-Webster has got a lot of sass going on. It's pretty, yeah. It talks back to people all the time. Like, don't get owned by a dictionary online. Basically, is a reasonable thing that your parents should tell you when you're small. I think in this day and age, but it's interesting. Yeah. That you really can get taken apart. There are some other good Twitter feeds out there that are doing some interesting things, like this Steakums. Steakums is this very philosophical. It's frozen meat. It's frozen steak, but it's like the brand manager for them is like talks about disinformation, and they're very self-aware, says that's what we do. But it's like really, it's just a bad time where like one of the best sources of information about stuff was a steak, a frozen meat thing from the Midwest.
Yeah, I remember Randall. We talked about it during data ethics. And Randall was defending Steakums.
As a product,
Yeah.
not just as a.
No, just like a product.
It just doesn't sound good.
It sounds like Slim Jim, like right? Like it just sounds like Slim Jim.
Yeah, it says steak. It says steak, but like it feels more in the unnamed meat category, right?
Like Chase just said, like it's the stuff that didn't make it into the hot dog.
Ooh, even worse. Yeah, because the hot dogs are stuff on the get most of the sawdust off it. Wow.
And then they were like, that's too crunchy. You gotta run that through the grinder again.
It's not pink enough.
There's a good YouTube video where these two guys are like, how much percent like sawdust can a Rice Krispie treat before like we start to notice? And they get to like 40 or 50%,
They did a taste test? That is magnificent. Rice Krispies, before we noticed. There was an old Colbert. God, I miss old Colbert. There was an old one where he had a big thing on Taco Bell because they got into trouble because their percentage of meat in their burgers dropped below the required amount, which is like 40%. Someone tested it. So and he's like, now it's meat adjacent. I just remember that line, meat adjacent. I think he was defending them because that was his character. Really, I should find that one. That's really great. Oh, let's write that down. That seems too good to lose. What is it again? It's the Rice Krispies. I won't quite. Maybe I'll tweet it from the thing. And then I want to find that old Colbert. Just a gem. I think it was Taco Bell, but it was just meat adjacent.
There was like a scandal with like Parmesan cheese a few years. Like it was just flavored sawdust. Like make a brand of cheap Parmesan cheese. It was literally just flavored. So like salted. Yeah.
So another really difficult thing to measure is trust, right? I mean, right? So trust, and of course, making money out of people, but that one you would think trust has to go to zero in that product, right? Like but it would be kind of good to that would be an interesting thing to measure. That's a really deep thing. Like how much. So Facebook, in my view, for years, right, has essentially sort of mined out social, like existed on top of social fabric that it kind of mined out the social trust. Like it sort of got weaker and weaker because you could trust things less and less, right? I mean, it's just sort of there's garbage on it, and your friends start shilling for products. It's pretty bad. So you're degrading the trust thing, and then you get into we're in a lot of trouble. There's a lot of oh yeah, that's just another thing, right? Like this is connected to like people in flow states probably aren't Instagramming about it or tweeting about it. Like afterwards, they might write about it. Like if you go out, maybe you just go to a party and have a great time talking with people, dancing or something. Like you're just having a great time. It was fun, right? But in the time, you're not really. Sports absolutely works like this. I mean, not just Brooklyn, but like team sport things. I mean, I have like all this kind of archival video in my head of playing sports, and it's just, and it can go wrong. But when it's like on song, it's unbelievable. It's a sort of, and you're not in it. And I remember growing up hearing, this is in Australia, but interviews with sports people, and it's not because of concussion, but just saying they didn't remember the game at all. And I think that's they have no idea what happened in the game. They were the best player on the field, or whatever it was. They just don't remember, or maybe it was the last quarter was the big deal. They have zero memory of it. They'd have to watch the video. They don't remember what happened. That's pretty deep flow because they performed fantastically. They made amazing decisions. It wasn't just like mechanical, like potato peeling. They did unbelievable kind of things, but have no memory of it. Yeah. Yeah, I wonder about chess players. Yeah, maybe. Some of them remember everything, right? Like yeah. But it's later on they can go back to it. Like LeBron James is like that. Okay, LeBron James is like that. Yeah, he can somewhat hilariously recount. Is it things he's watched or is it games he's been in?
It's like plays that he interviewed after the post game.
Right.
And he's
And he would
like,
tick, 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 tick.
sequence of like what happened.
Right. No, it really struck me when I heard that. It's exactly this.
And it was like he had just played back.
Yeah. Okay.
Cut the footage from the game, the footage from the interview
And
together.
and he's right.
You literally just watch him be like, yep, and then this happened. And it's not just like he's like, me and this other player, like me and my matchup.
No, it's a complex thing. Absolutely. Sure. That's really interesting. But there will be other players, I'm absolutely sure. And I mean, I'm not sure. It's not obvious who would be. Like, it's not obvious that he would remember. He doesn't have to, right? But I mean, they watch a lot of footage and whatever. But there'll be other players you ask this question. Like, I have no idea. I have no idea. Wow. But there might be some who do, right? They just they remember painfully, perhaps, like what, But I just mean other players in NBA, right? Just sitting there on the same team as LeBron, like who just have no idea what happened. Like you have what's that?
Mike Tyson talks about like when he would be in fights, he doesn't like
Yeah.
No, like when he bit off Holyfield, like Vander Holyfield's ear, he says he's like, I did not. Like,
Well, he was in a flow state.
yeah, he's no different.
I mean, I don't know if you've ever seen, like, I grew up in sort of a rough world, but if you ever see, like, if you ever been, I don't want you to be part of it, but if you've ever seen like a street fight where people really fight, people are not taking Instagram, like it is, yeah, unbelievably, right. And I mean, that's what's happening, albeit in a box with lots of people watching. Yeah, Mike Tyson, who has a fantastic speaking voice. We just want to make that really clear. Okay, we don't want to.
Remembering all of the faces at your sports game is important to you winning the game, then suddenly like your memory improves.
You could train it if you needed to. Yeah? Is that what you're saying? Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I feel like it would be in my mind. It's different. Convincing yourself it's important versus training it. Like if you can convince yourself it's important, you might not even have to train it. It just
Okay.
immediately happens.
Yeah.
You suddenly have memory of the audience.
It might be with pro sports that there's so much video that like it kind of actually downgrades that part of people's, because you just play. Like there's so much else is going to be taken care of. You don't even have to pick up a drink. Someone's going to put it in your mouth. I mean, like you can just play, right? Like you have to wash your clothes or anything. So you could actually kind of, but he obviously enjoys that as well. Like it's interesting to him, so. Is it necessary for him to be? I don't know. Okay, so it's good to go through these things. Let me just. Oh yeah, here. Okay, so how do we measure these things, right? So how do you? I mean, all these other emotional states. I think after all this time, I'm pretty sure now that really there's just sort of happiness, negativeness, like positive, negative, that you can measure through individual, like large scale individual words. Obviously, someone presenting to you and talking with in person, you can tell they're disgusted. You can tell they're sad. You can, I mean, not always, but you can kind of get a sense of that, right? But sort of at a large, what I'm going to say is this sort of large scale lexical instruments can't really distinguish disgust, sadness, anger, and fear, which seems a bit odd, but it just means, if you do these temperature-like measures, you can't really break them apart. They're subtle. So there's sort of this big signal of good, bad, but that's still sorting that out. So, which is a bit of a shame, right? Like it'd be great to have this kind of a disgust time series and a fear time series, and like I would love to have kind of been able to get that out, but it looks like they all look the same. They all look the same. So, okay, so so this is sort of still an open question to me. But there are many papers that claim they've measured whatever, all sorts of things. So this is experience sampling. We kind of went through day reconstruction. So that's Kahneman's thing. Kahneman got interested in happiness. Like why people get interested in happiness is kind of an interesting thing. But this is after I think working with Tversky, that main period of working together for which they got their Nobel Prizes. Well, sorry, Tversky had passed away, so he did not get it because Nobels are stupid, and for many reasons, and that's one of them. But he did this work. I think it was in Vancouver at that point. But it was day reconstruction. So this is a bit tricky. At the end of the day, you've got a little journal thing, and you're part of a study. You've lived your life. You forget about it properly, but you try to enter like what happened today and how did you feel about it. So something. People use that for lots of other things, but this was a sampling. So again, this is self-reporting. This is an interesting one because it's being I think this might have been with Palm Pilots originally, like way back when well before phones, or like phones were widespread. So there's some drawbacks. This is of course it's memory and self-perception. Again, you've got to have them, but you've got to accommodate these sort of problems. It can induce misreporting, and it can be costly, right? These are okay things. You just try to accommodate them and deal with them, but you're aware of them. It just means that you can't scale it up to like how are 300 million people feeling right now. Tricky. And on the other scale, you can't sort of tell something about 300 million people and sort of go down into fine-grained details, and that's fine, right? So there's sort of distant and close, and it's the same with books, like distant reading and close reading. This citation is to a paper. This is one of these things we sort of worry. Okay, I should update that, but it's I guess it's been stuck for a long time. But this is how am I doing? This paper, pretty interesting. So what it's about is it was in Mexico, and it's connected to, the problem was, so in the US, right, or Western, like you have text, and there are a lot of problems, but so very developed countries, you have tax and this sort of structure, so generally how well people are doing, so you can use that information on how much people earned last year or whatever to give them money, right? If you want social programs, right? So it's not developed enough in Mexico, so it was relied on surveys, like how are people doing, and what they found, so how do you detect misreporting? It's difficult, right? Because you just have the reports. So they had to do this extra layer of going to really check. So you ask people, in this thing, they're asking people, do you have everything from, do you have a dirt floor in your home to do you have, a pickup truck, or do you have a microwave? Do you have running water? It's like the full gamut of things. And then get a lot of answers from people and then sort of peg them, and these people need help, these people don't need help. Going on about it, but what they found was they would then go and look at a sample of people's places, and there was misreporting at both ends of that spectrum for different reasons. So the first one, that you don't have a bathroom and those sorts of things, it was shame, right? So people misreported. They said they had a hard floor. They said they had running water because of shame. So even though this would have helped them, they're the people you're trying to help. Very human response to this is just, I don't want to tell you things. At the other end was greed, because if they ask you if you have a microwave or a pickup truck, and you say no, because maybe you get one, or you're trying to, you don't want to give away that you have wealth or something like that. So it was a very different kind of mechanism elicited in people. It's not universal, but it just means that these things get distorted for different reasons in different corners of questions. So asking people how happy they are, it's a little bit tricky. I know. Okay, that works. All right. This is the experience sampling example that moving back from that sort of 80s and 90s kind of versions of it to a phone-based one, right? So now it's still 2010, but smartphones are sort of around, but it's a bit better. Okay, so this is, you're getting pinged randomly through the day, and you get a little question thing, and you answer it, right? I'm sorry about this. So there are two parts to this thing. So there's, what are you doing? And so these little, you have to be careful. Like, I'm not sure if this circle means the area or the goddamn radius, right? I'm not sure. It should be the area. It should be the number. I mean, that's the way at least something like the New York Times does it. Okay, so let's presume it's sort of that. Excuse me. So the square root of the area is something going on. All right. So working is dominant, for example, talking, conversation. Rest and sleep, actually, it sort of depends what they did with this thing, right? But some people woke up and answered the thing. Obviously, it's annoying. And then this scale is, positive. This is the negative to positive, right? So these are the most negative things, and that's partly because someone woke you up, I would guess, right? So this is a bit of a funny thing. So working, people aren't happy. Home computer, commuting famously sucks. People report the hatred of commuting all around. Although, with electric cars, we're all going to be listening to podcasts about going to Mars. Which one? Yeah, I guess just sitting at the thing, surfing the web. So again, that could be like, it doesn't have. So, this question now would be pretty interesting. I think they should break out. Are you playing video games? Like, that would be a lot of people. It's a pretty big flow state. Right? So, it sort of makes sense, right? Like, it's not too bad. This is pretty. It's pretty small. It's also like what's interruptible. So this is a interesting data point because they like answered the question. I mean, I don't like to. There's a gross thing, but it's just like, oh my god. Anyway, so this is going for a run. It's like, yeah. What's that?
It's not on a phone.
No, this is on a phone.
Oh, this is.
That's what I was trying to say. It is on a phone. It's still not. It's still a bit mixed in terms of like, smartphones aren't universal, but
Okay.
yeah.
I would have thought that it would have been like a sheet of paper. Someone would be like, oh.
I think that's a fair assessment of the past, but they're able to do like a more sophisticated thing than people have done in the past, which would just staring into space. Well, where's watching television? Okay, here it is. Right. Yeah.
Doing nothing is better than watching.
My brain is empty. My brain is empty. Yeah. Yeah. And then there's sort of these like unpleasant. Then there's like, is it pleasant? And is your this is the flow question, right? Is your mind wandering, or is it not? There's a bit of a weird negative way to put it, but not mind wandering. Huh. Does that make sense?
I mean, if they said like
What?
concentrating, that has more negative than not mind wandering.
I'm not. Yeah, so there's sort of unpleasant, neutral, and pleasant with mind wandering, but this one doesn't seem to have unpleasant, neutral, and I'm not sure why. This is like there's no valence associated with it. Like it's just flow is not really an emotional state.
I think they're talking about like the differences. Like, I guess what they could be saying is like there's different kinds of what's happening when your mind is wandering.
Yeah, no, for sure. But I think like
The absolute absence of it is only what one type.
yeah, no, I mean that's what it does seem to. I mean, I haven't looked at it for a while. It's like that's what it seems to. Or maybe I've never looked at that properly, to be honest. So this seems because this is sort of like this is a group and then this is its own thing. But yeah, this is a bad place to be in. This is not great. Yeah, see, this is better than people often would possibly say. Right? Playing is good. That might be that. People might put that into video games. Play is such an important category, I think. I did have this whole thing, like the Play project, which is to study human creativity. And anyway, sorry. But play is a very interesting thing that people, otters, other organisms, crows, like it's a really, I mean, it's unbelievable, right? I mean, like, it's still stupidly, anthropomorphic or anthrocentric in our views of these things. But what was the thing I watched the other day? It was TikToks or whatever, right? But it was like, I think it was a kitten. Is that what it was? Running up a thing and then just like sliding down it. I mean, those things are very, very enjoyable. You watch those things all day. Anyway, this was a pretty. We could look to see if this stuff was. It was published in Science. They got a big billing for this, and you could imagine this kind of stuff being done over and over. But look, in this time, Facebook becomes huge, Twitter becomes huge, and the whole game of like how people interact, how advertisers interact with you, and what they know about you, it changes unbelievably in this 10 years, right? And targeting people and so on. So I'm not sure how much this, you have to pay people to be in this kind of study, I suppose. Like you can still do that, which is itself a problem, right? Like, you're paying people to do things. All right, well, I'm gonna go through this. It's good. This is fine. It's fine. Like this is good to talk about. Great questions. Flow. If you ever, I mean, I don't know how that book stands up now, but it's we'll just read about it. If that's not a, you knew about it, right? Like, yeah.
Well, I'm not sure what you're bringing into it, but I was wondering if you're a video game company and you had like all states in a video game, you could probably like pick out flow. That's what I was thinking about.
I mean, video games are a spectacular flow space. Unbelievable. Like Re-
You know if someone's in flow or not. If they're in game for 2 hours, like,
Maybe they're really moments of it where it's just like,
There's definitely playing well too, right? I mean, like the God mode thing where you can watch other people and kind of appreciate. And I mean, of course, esports. You can like
You can like learn the
you could
distribution.
if you had I don't want to do this, but if you had video on them, you could see like the like are they just kind of like really I mean, you could probably do it from video. Like they're playing the thing, it's going well, and you could say like this person's like getting wrecked and it's a disaster and they keep dying. You know, they're in anguish and they're not whatever. They're eating Cheetos or something. You know, like it's not
Maybe like you can see when people pause it.
right. I think keystrokes even there might be a whole like pattern to that that
Then you could learn the distribution of what like these different features look like.
there was a study. This is from a long time ago when I was quite young. I remember reading, and I don't know how they did this or if this is even true, but it's supposedly mastery of video games. It was early on. You know, this is like Pac-Man time, right? But there was a study of people's neural behavior. So I guess you could do it with ECG sort of things. It seems wildly advanced at the time, but I think it might have been just that. But basically, people were learning new games. It was connected to measures of intelligence. I don't know how that was done, but proficiency in other ways. And the people who really struggle with the games didn't get very far. The neural activity was just huge the whole time. But if you became good at it and you kind of got the pattern right, it calmed down. You became because that's part of like even say running, right? Like once you sort of like really basic human behaviors, but if you see someone who runs beautifully or plays a piano, they've removed all of the excess stuff, right? They've gotten rid of the bad circuitry or the parasitic things, and it's a pure thing. And that's also why it can tip into this is a network story, I think, where it can tip into the yips, which is a golf term. Golf is terrible, but it's a where someone suddenly can't putt anymore, right? And there was for baseball fans again terrible, but Chuck Knobloch, Knobloch in the 90s. He was a third base for the Yankees and then famously just started to toss it into the crowd and just couldn't throw anymore. And it was a disaster. He just like, it was comically bad. And it was like, you're so good at doing something. The circuitry's so good. There's a famous piano, I've forgotten his name, my wife would know, a piano player who I think one of his hands just went wrong, just could not play for like 20 years or something like that. Because your circuitry is so good and it's so chiseled down. Like if it kind of goes wrong in there, it's like explodes. So you've got something that's beautifully efficient, beautifully structured, and it's crystalline in a way. And it's lost its ability to kind of adapt and self-correct or whatever. But even just putting, like this stupid thing, like they just like hit it twice as far, or like everything is just gone, and that's where at least the term the yips became famous. But that's a sort of interesting thing with video. So I don't know. I mean, of course, you could hook people up to ECGs and see like what's the guy who free climbed. I mean, honestly, I've watched some of that, and I'm like sitting behind the couch while my daughter's watching, and I'm like, I'm a acrophile, like no way, and I'm just like just sweating and standing up, and it's like no. But I mean, his brain activity would be really interesting. He's still alive, right?
Yeah. I wonder if like you can reach like a flow state doing something that's like mostly just thinking about a problem. Like
Oh yes,
flow state when
no,
trying to solve
100%.
science problem.
No, absolutely, no, and I'm really serious about this. It is a total. You just the stroking the beard thing or whatever. If you're a guy, I hate beards, but like that kind of stroking this sort of thing. Also staring upwards, which I did a lot myself, and apparently it turns off your eyes a bit. So if you do this, it sort of switches off the optical circuitry. So there's sort of a story for that. Like they're like, like it's actually like, so that's a thing you can just make yourself do. You're just like, okay, let's all stare at the ceiling and think about things. You're not really looking properly.
I feel like it might be easier for things like you're strictly thinking, like the cryptic crossword, where you're thinking about one small.
Yeah, you're thinking about structure.
You have to put it in your head, but math for sure. I think writing you could do it. Apparently, Tesla apparently did this, right? Tesla apparently just constructed giant machines in his head. He had the whole blueprint sitting in there, and that's the story.
It's
Yeah.
so sad though when you said Tesla.
I know. I thought about that the other day for some reason. I was thinking, like, you, god damn it. Anyway, this is the heritage. Yeah, right. This is
Elon Musk didn't even come up with that name. He like harassed some guy.
sure, of course. Yeah. Well, and Tesla was Tesla. Anyway, Edison got him right.
What?
Edison. I'm just talking about back in the day. Tesla didn't had a bit. Anyway, we run on Tesla stuff, so that's good. All right. Next week we'll talk about Edison electrocuting an elephant at Coney Island. Yeah. We won't talk about it, but these people totally did it. Unbelievable. All right, thanks. It was great. Flo, that's fun to talk about.